Welcome back to another episode of Paranormal UK Radio, broadcasting on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Irene Allen Block, and with me today is Mark Johnson.
Hey there.
Hello, Mark. And we've got Andrew Chaplin back with us today.
Good evening, good evening. I'm looking forward to this one, I have to say.
Yeah, I know you are. You're all excited, aren't you, Andrew?
Yeah. I'm jumping up and down.
we had to ground Andrew last time. He's been standing in the corner. You know, we're finally letting him out a little bit.
Yeah, the straitjacket's been loosened and the crayons are put back in their box.
That's right. You've been banned from the last couple of shows, I believe.
Being
naughty. Yes, being naughty Andrew.
Monkey.
No, you are a monkey. Anyway, Mark, do you want to... what's been happening? Anything been happening before we start?
No, not much. How about you, Andrew?
I was laughing my ass off, I suppose you Americans would say, at the Oscars. That was hilarious. I mean, what was going on there? Seriously, it's nothing to do with paranormal, but it was just so funny.
What did they do? Did they give them the wrong envelope or something?
Yeah, the company that tallies all the ballots, Price Waterhouse. They've been doing it for years. They screwed up and gave the wrong envelope, and they wound up announcing the wrong Best Picture. And everybody got on stage, they're getting their Oscars, and then all of a sudden it comes out like, oh, nope, sorry, we made a mistake.
Wrong one.
Here, give it back. Give me that Oscar back. Give it.
There's nothing funnier than a lovey getting massively embarrassed like that.
Yeah, I know, but it must be ever so disappointing, especially when you think you've won and then 5 minutes later you find out you've not.
Yeah.
No, it's, on the consolation prize, I guess their movie did win some other Oscars, so it's not like they're going home empty-handed.
Yeah, I suppose they had to make it up to them somehow, didn't they?
Yeah, but that's still a big faux pas on the term of the on the Oscars.
What would have been funnier is if they'd all made their their thank you speeches about who they want to thank and how wonderful it is to win, and then they discover it's the wrong one. that would be even funnier.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we're laughing at other people's misfortune, but
no, it's bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
anyway, shall we get on with the show, Mark? Do you want to introduce our guest?
Who we got, Irene? Who have we got?
No, calm down, Andy.
I know,
I knew I should have tied him to that chair.
Andrew's chomping at the bit because our guest tonight is
Andrew's hero.
Yes, Andrew's hero, the one and only.
Yes, definitely.
Mr. Nick Redfern is joining the program tonight. How are you tonight, Nick?
Hey, guys. I'm good, thanks.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Irene.
Hello, darling.
Mark, we really need an applause button.
Yes,
we do. We need a applause.
Yeah, I'll add that sound effect in later. For those of you who don't know Nick Redfern, and if you don't know Nick Redfern, you've really been living under a rock for the last 10 years. Nick is an author and researcher. He has appeared numerous times on the Ancient Aliens television series. And Nick, how many books are you up to now? About 10,000?
Not quite. I've done, actually the new book is 40, but it's not that, well, I guess to some people it might seem a lot, but it's actually not, because it's 40 books across 21 years, so it's like 2 a year is what it averages out to, so it's not, sort of anything out of the ordinary for a lot of authors, really.
Before we get into talking the specific subjects on your books, we're going to talk about your last couple of books that released. Curious on your writing and research project process for each book. How long does it usually take you, once you get an idea on the type of book you want to write, to do your research and then write the completed manuscript?
Well, it really kind of depends on the nature of the story. I mean, for example, some of the books I've done, the research has sort of started with a snippet of information from one sort of elderly person who remembered something from years ago, and then it's a case of trying to chase down other sources and leads and speak to them and try and get them to speak on the record, etc., etc. So when it's sort of like something parallels kind of like a detective story, if you like, a real-life detective story, it can take quite a while. And sometimes there's been a couple of occasions where I've written a book and I've had to put it on hold for sort of 6 months or even more sometimes because the research or the the following the evidence has stalled. I've hit a brick wall until somebody else comes along. So occasionally that has meant a book has been put on hold for quite a while. Now, if I'm dealing with something where it's predominantly, witness-based or interview-based and all the people are happy to talk, then, it's just a case of really transcribing the interviews and then putting my words around it and so on. So in that case, I can get it done in sort of about 4 months or something like that. So it really does depend on, the nature of the story and the scope of it. And, so that kind of dictates the time frame, really.
I think that the reason for that question may have been, Nick, because it's taken me 3 years so far to write The Spy in Paris, and I'm still not there.
Well, I always say to people, if you've got a book inside you, and I always say that everybody does have a book inside them, a story to tell. As long as you're happy with it and, you put out a good piece of work and people like it, how long it takes, it shouldn't, unless a publisher's sort of screaming at you for the manuscript, as they sometimes do.
Yeah, my publisher does.
Yeah, and I'm her publisher, so I'm always yelling at her.
But, it really depends. And, if you're not on a deadline, then that's great. Sometimes, though, if you are on a deadline, the publisher says, we'll give you 6 months to write it, then you've got to deliver what you can. And sometimes, I've had to say to them through my agents, look, this is going to take longer, but it's hopefully going to be a good book and people like it. So, I need another couple of months. And typically they're fine with that, and it's one of these situations where, like for me, the whole research, and writing, whether it's UFOs, Bigfoot or whatever, it's a passion for me, but it's also a passion that I've also turned into a job, so I'm a pretty laid-back guy, but when it comes to sort of work stuff, I'm not. You have to be on top of your game when you're dealing with things like contracts and deadlines and how the publisher perceives the book versus how you perceive it. And, sometimes it can end up with raised voices because somebody has one idea and I'm like, well, I'm writing the book. This is how we're going to do it, So there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind that I guess unless you are a writer, you might not necessarily see a lot of those issues. And sometimes they are issues, Right. That's how I kind of view it.
Well, I keep saying because I'm a spy, because it's a spy in Paris, I have to keep going back and forth to Paris all the time to write the book.
Well, that's not a bad thing.
Oh.
You got to do that research,
Yeah, like the furthest I go is to very often, if I'm doing all my interviews by phone, the furthest I go is sort of to the kitchen to make a mug of tea and back, I don't get to see Paris, unfortunately.
Well, but you do have, not only with all the writing that you do, you have a lot of the appearances at the conventions, you do a lot of traveling for that, you do a lot of interviews for television, I get the impression that you're keeping the Monster Energy drink company in business.
Well, actually, I don't touch those things. I don't even drink soda. All that stuff's no good for you. So.
As I'm sitting here drinking my Diet Coke, so yeah, I know what you mean. It's bad for you.
Yeah. Basically, I live on like water, Gatorade, hot tea, and lager. That's about it. But when it comes to liquids,
the lager is the most important part.
Well, that's right, yeah.
Yep.
But, it's one of these things where, I enjoy going, to conferences and lectures. I enjoy being on the road. A lot of the books I write are written in sort of like a road trip style. Depends, again, on the nature of the story and how you tell the story as to whether or not you just, relate the story, the historical story, or you, like particularly with Bigfoot stuff and Loch Ness Monster and the Chupacabra, things like that. I tend to write them in the road trip style, that the way the expedition happened. Now, in terms of sort of conferences and lectures, as I said, I enjoy doing those, and to me, it's good fun. You get to share the information, but I enjoy the social side of conferences as well. So for those reasons, I'm always sort of kind of energized to do that anyway. I don't need energizing up, it's already there. So.
That's great. Andrew, I think you wanted to lead in with a question now.
Yeah, Nick, how did you get into the whole monsters thing specifically? Because, I mean, in the world of the paranormal, a lot of people go down the ghosts avenue and the UFOs avenue, but you've taken quite an interesting turn. Just wondered if you could tell us how you got into that.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, although I'm very interested in the UFO subject and cryptozoology, I'm actually not really that interested in things like ghosts and haunted houses, and I've never... maybe one or two occasional articles, but other than that, I've never really written about ghosts for no other reason that it just, as I say, it just doesn't really interest me. But in terms of cryptozoology and strange creatures, when I was about 6 years old, my mum and dad took me on a week's holiday to Scotland, and we spent a day at Loch Ness, and my dad told me the story of the Loch Ness Monster. And, when you're sort of like a 5-6 year old little kid on the shores of Loch Ness, hearing a story about how there's monsters in this huge lake that you're standing right at the edge of right now, it kind of really got me excited, as it would at that age. And then when I was about, I don't know, sort of 10 or 11, 12, probably 10 or 11, something like that, I started reading a few books on sort of paranormal subjects. This would have been like John Keel and Brad Steiger and Frank Edwards and some of the early writers whose sort of second and third hand 30-year-old books, I'd pick up at a local bookshop or whatever. And some of them, when you're 10 years old, was a little bit above me, particularly some of Keel's ideas back then. But over time, as I got older, I came to sort of think he was on the right path. But some of it to start with was a little bit, when you're 10 or whatever, to get into. But anyway, that's how I sort of went from there. And then when I finished school, I wasn't, to put it diplomatically, the best student. I didn't have much time for lessons. School for me was me and my mates sort of hanging out and having a good time and, having girlfriends or going to the Christmas party at school and smuggling beer in and all that kind of stuff. That's for me what school was. I didn't enjoy it at all, and I didn't do well at all. I didn't get any of the expected qualifications or anything like that.
It was a typical British school, Nick.
What's that?
Typical British school.
Yeah, I went to like a typical sort of classic working class comprehensive school in central England, just about 10 miles outside the city of Lichfield in Staffordshire. And, as I said, school for me was just it wasn't what it should have been.
No,
and then
I didn't get an education at school either. I was too busy smoking in the girls' toilets.
Yeah, well, I didn't get nothing like O-levels. I barely got any of the old CSEs, as they were known at the time, for people who old enough to remember CSEs. I don't know if they still even have them now, but and then when I finished school, I'm like, oh wow, I've gone from being a kid at school to now I'm in the into the big world, so to speak, the real world. And as luck would have it, when I went down the old job centres, as they used to be known and probably still are, there was a job offered on a magazine in the town nearest where I was living. It was called Zero, and it was a new publication, and it was basically sort of entertainment for like teenagers, really. And so it covered like music, fashion, concert reviews, band reviews, that kind of thing, interviews with bands. And I went along and, I told them I had a big interest in music and concerts and all that kind of thing, which was true. And even though I didn't do well at school, I did enjoy writing stories as a kid, and I enjoyed reading books. And so they offered me the job, and it was like an 18-month job, and that sort of got me involved in the field of writing. And a couple of the guys who'd been in that field for a lot longer than me, I was just going in sort of, from the bottom of the ladder, so to speak. They've been in the business for years, and they sort of taught me sort of the skills of how to tell a story, how to sort of reel the reader in, how to structure it and things like that. And so I just sort of picked it up from there, really. And then that went on until I was about 20, and this was at the height of the whole Thatcher regime, as I call it, when, there was the unemployment on a massive scale and so on, and I just could not get back into that business. I had just a bunch of regular jobs for like the next 4 or 5 years. I was forklift driver, van driver, shelf stacker, worked at a petrol station, all sorts of stuff. And then when I was about 25, I thought, well, why don't I try and get back into the field of writing? And I started doing articles for like self-published journals and newsletters on UFOs and paranormal stuff. And then into the sort of mid-90s, then you said a lot of, the X-Files kicked off and a lot of interest in that. And the spin-off was a lot of magazines surfaced on the newsstands then, like UFO Reality, The Unexplained, UFO Encounters, Alien Encounters, all sorts of stuff. And that's when I started working freelance in that field, and then thought about writing a couple of books, and which I did. And the first 3 books I did were published in the UK in the late 90s. And that sort of really, took me from the beginnings in Loch Ness with that, when I first heard that story, through to, I said, to the late 90s when the first books I wrote came out.
And, you do cover a lot of various, very intelligent concepts and topics that do run the whole wide range of ufology, monsters, conspiracies, ancient aliens, I mean, you name it. And so we've got a lot to talk about tonight. I do want to bring up the fact that your newest book is out, 365 Days of UFOs, A Year of Alien Encounters. And so you have 365 of your favorite UFO stories in this book. And, how did you go about the process of selecting which UFO stories you really wanted to include in this one?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, if you're going to write a book on 365 days of UFOs, and over the years, there have been thousands and thousands of UFO cases. So there's definitely sort of no shortage, so to speak, of cases. There's probably sort of 9 or 10 cases on record for every day of the year. And of course, you've got to, include the famous ones like Rendlesham Forest and Roswell and the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, that kind of thing. But what I always try to avoid when I'm writing a book is to go over old ground, because I don't see the point as an author of just sort of recycling and recirculating what somebody else has already done, and I don't just think of it from the perspective of being an author, but also as a reader of books. You don't want to pick a book up and think, well, hang on, this one's taken from this book and that one's taken from that book. So there's no point in doing that. So what I did, apart from the sort of handful of really well-known ones you've got to put in there, what I did was to basically go back to all the old files I've had for years where people had given me stories and had given me permission to use them, but they didn't really necessarily fit in any of the books that I was previously working on. So they kind of just sat in a Word document for years. I mean, literally. But of course, when the theme of the book isn't, Bigfoot or the Men in Black, it isn't a subject, but it's a date-based book like this one, then you can fit it anywhere because it's the date that's as important as the case. So what I've done is to use, for the most part, cases that people really won't have seen before. It covers everything from Men in Black, crop circles, abductions, contact cases, UFO landings, UFO crashes, documents, pilot encounters, that kind of thing. And each case has roughly sort of around about a page or slightly more for each case. So it's about 400 pages long for 365 books. And somebody said to me, well, what about leap years? I said, well, I'm not going to call the book 365 and a quarter days of UFOs. That would be taken sort of obsessive compulsive way too far.
Right. When you have been researching UFOs and the subject as long as you have you found that your opinion on what could be the cause behind the phenomenon has changed from when you started?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, when I first got into all this, it was when I was a kid. I was just sort of 10, 11, whatever. And I think at that age, on a lot of subjects, and certainly when you're younger than that, everything is kind of a little bit black and white. You see this and that, and you don't sort of see the bigger picture. And so for that reason, when I first got into this, I was of the mind that UFOs are extraterrestrial, Bigfoot is, some sort of giant ape that just hasn't been classified by conventional zoology yet, etc., etc. But in saying that, the more I dug into this, and certainly by the time I was sort of in my 20s, one of the things I found was that more than anything else, I began to see how there seemed to be connections between a lot of these phenomena that a lot of people would suggest weren't connections or it was just coincidence. Like John Keel pointed out in his books how when UFOs were seen, on a number of occasions, people would report strange creatures in the same area, and even at the same time frame, like Bigfoot and other weird animals. I found stories of sort of really strange UFO encounters at Loch Ness, and even a couple of Men in Black cases at Loch Ness. So over time, I came to accept, if you like, on the evidence, that many of these phenomena were somehow interlinked together. And certainly, as I said, since my 20s, probably late 20s, where I saw it all as sort of separate phenomena, then I began to sort of really sort of swing around to the idea that we're dealing with something like phenomena that are all somehow interlinked and that are probably more like multidimensional than they are nuts and bolts extraterrestrial. I think a lot of these phenomena have the same point of origin, which is, I think, some sort of realm, if you like, if you want to call it like that, that coexists with us rather than having to come from this star system or that star system, or that Bigfoot is just, an ape or whatever. I think there's way
there's
more
like interdimensionality to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that in my mind. And I think, whether people agree with that, I think a lot of people do, the more they dig into it. But there are so many people also that just don't want their belief systems challenged on what Bigfoot is or what Nessie is or what UFOs are. But I mean, I can only go where the witnesses tell us. I always say to people, the witnesses are the most important people in this subject, because without the witnesses, we've got nothing to go on. And when they're telling us, when they're the ones who are telling us that, I saw a UFO land, and then 10 minutes later, this strange Bigfoot-like creature lumbered out the woods. I know some people who wouldn't touch those type of stories because they see them as being too controversial. But when you start self-censoring yourself and you censor the stories of the witnesses because they don't sit well, then to me, that's crossing the line. Just because it doesn't fit comfortably with your belief systems doesn't mean you should ignore it. It means you should realize that eventually you need to revise your belief systems or your conclusions, because that's, as I said, that's where the evidence is taking us.
I agree. I think
sorry, Andrew.
Sorry. I certainly agree with that, Nick. And there's cases where people having UFO experiences, they're also getting paranormal experience in terms of ghost
That's what I was just about to say.
Vice versa. Who was it who had the ranch? Was it Jay Widener or is it somebody else? There was a ranch, and it was connected with abductee and contactees type stories, but as well as the greys and the aliens coming through, they're also getting kind of dead relatives coming through as well.
Yeah, there's a lot like that. And I mean, to give you another example, I've done 3 books on the Men in Black and 1 on the Women in Black, and one of the trends I've found, the real MIB and the Women in Black are not like the movie versions. They're clearly not even human, I don't think. But in a lot of MIB and Women in Black cases I've got, in the immediate aftermath of people being visited by them or interrogated by them, people either, in some cases, fall sick, almost as if they've been like supernaturally infected by the presence of them, or they've also reported sort of violent poltergeist activity in the home, as if some sort of residual supernatural energy has remained after the Men in Black have left. So, there's a lot of weird stuff like that, where you find sort of paranormal and ghostly phenomena like poltergeist activity turning up in what is perceived to be at least like a UFO incident. And again, Keel back in the 60s and 70s was really going out on a limb with all that kind of stuff, because the nuts and bolts angle of UFOs and, being from outer space was so dominating. But, the good thing is he stuck to his guns and said, you're wrong. You're sort of tied up with out-of-date paradigms or whatever, and I think it's ironically, a lot of more people today are coming around to that point of view, and Keel unfortunately didn't live to see it, but certainly he definitely had a sizable audience, but for a long time it was sort of eclipsed by the whole the conventional angle, if you like, of ufology, if you can call anything in ufology conventional.
No, that's true. I mean, and when you talk about, UFO cases exhibiting either cryptid or paranormal, I mean, I actually had a paranormal case that I worked on in New Jersey several years ago, where it was mostly paranormal based, and yet one night the client called me the next day freaking out about, she said she woke up in the middle of the night and saw a figure standing by her bedside, and then it turned around and it faced her, and she said, "Mark, you're not going to believe me. You think I'm crazy, but I saw it was a freaking alien." It looked like the typical type of gray, a taller version, but a gray alien, and yet that case was primarily paranormal. Now, let me throw out another case at you here, and I don't know if you've done any of your own research into it, but there's John Edmonds there outside of Phoenix and his Stardust Ranch. Have you done any research into that case? Because he claims to deal with a lot of UFO-type phenomena and the grays, but it almost seems like it's not exactly aliens he's dealing with. It might be some kind of other types of beings. I just was curious if you had looked into it and what your thoughts are on it.
Well, I haven't looked into that particular one, but what I can tell you in relation to the Greys is I've got a lot of records on file from witnesses who, in a number of cases, like you mentioned earlier, about seeing dead relatives, I've got a number of, or actually quite a few cases where people felt that their souls are being extracted by the Greys, as if the soul is some sort of part of the body, if you like, or in some fashion, but which, using some sort of bizarre science maybe, that it can actually be extracted and removed from the human body and almost sort of placed in different bodies, so to speak, which sounds sort of really bizarre. But that kind of ties in with what Whitley Strieber said in his Communion book about how he asked them, what's your role, why are you here? And they said, we recycle souls. And stories about the souls also turn up in, like, for example, the late John Mack's books on abductions. And you can find it in quite a lot of UFO books. But again, a lot of researchers won't talk about this soul aspect because they see it as not being in line with their more conventional views that abductions are just the work of sort of alien doctors engaged in like a genetic experiment to create human-alien hybrids or whatever. That's the more conventional scenario. But there's no doubt that these weirder aspects of the abduction phenomenon are fully a part of it. But, ufology very often just won't touch them because they see it going down a pathway that they don't want to go down themselves. But again, this is what the witnesses are telling us, that there seems to be some sort of soul manipulation going on. And, I think Communion, Strieber's book, was probably one of the most important abduction books ever because it did point out how the then accepted imagery of what an abduction was actually far off the mark. Strieber was saying stuff that really was, for that time back in 87 when it came out, was quite revolutionary in terms of pushing it away from just the abduction angle as a scientific event.
Well, even Whitley has mentioned in his later books as well, and during some interviews, and I've had an opportunity to interview him once, where he has mentioned that on some of his experiences that he's actually seen people who have died. In one case, there was somebody he interacted with that he didn't know had already passed away. He found out after the fact. And yet there they are on these crafts seeming very much alive. So, it begs the question, are they dealing, or when in those experiences he had, dealing with a spirit, a ghost, or some type of time manipulation, or a different type of reality where they could appear? I mean, the more you look into this subject, the stranger it gets. And I actually believe that, we're still just scratching the surface of what's out there. There's a good chunk of it that I think may even be beyond our comprehension. I mean, it's certainly strange.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that. And I think, the problem is that, and this isn't just something that's relevant to ufologists, it's just down to us as people. We tend to try and figure things out based upon our existing knowledge, and sometimes I think we're dealing with phenomena that is beyond our knowledge, in the same way that 500 years ago, if you'd shown a Boeing 747 jumbo jet to people then, they just have no way to really understand it, because science, technology, education, etc., hadn't reached the people of 500 years ago, So I think it's the same with us, that we're limited on what we can learn by the fact that, our knowledge is limited, and our science and technology is limited too. Now, although I do believe the abduction phenomenon is a real one, and, maybe even the sort of the alien-human hybrid is a real one. But if that is true, there's also this other aspect that the Greys do seem to have an understanding of the afterlife, and they have some understanding that the soul is something that is like intimately a part of each of us, but also it's something that can be manipulated and used in some sense. Which, kind of sounds strange, but it all sounds a little bit sinister, the idea of sort of manipulating and moving souls around and juggling them about. It gets into some really weird areas. So in that sense, I think we are dealing with something that even now we're only touching on the fringes of it. And I sometimes wonder, people say, why won't the government tell us the truth about UFOs? Well, if it was just the case that somebody else's equivalent of NASA had been here and they crashed occasionally, we've got half a dozen bodies locked away, in cryogenic storage or whatever, and now we've decided to tell you. I think I can actually see that might have been told to us. But if you imagine that if the government might have, perhaps they have got wreckage, perhaps they have got bodies, but if they've also found out there's this weirder aspect that involves life after death and soul manipulation, that might actually be the biggest reason as to why they won't tell us, because I don't view the people within government or whatever secret agencies hiding all this, I don't view them as the bad guys or evil as some people in ufology do. I mean, I imagine that for the most part, they're normal people with families, and they go out on weekends and do stuff, but they're sitting on this massive secret that they don't know how to tell. You could tell the world that aliens visited back in the 40s and crashed and Roswell was real, etc. But how do you tell the world that we don't know what these things are, we're not sure where they're from or what their agenda is, and they seem to be involved in manipulating our souls? I don't see how any government agency could ever say that and not have it cause massive disruption. I don't think just admitting we've got bodies from Roswell would cause massive disruption, but telling people that their souls are being manipulated by things that we don't even know what they are, that probably would. So I think it could be something like that has dictated the secrecy.
Nick, do you think that the Greys, for want of a better phrase, are the ones that are actually in charge of the reincarnation process?
Well, they seem to be ones that are more tied to it. Yeah, I mean, you don't get that with the stories that people talk about reptilians and more human-looking ones. It seems to be the Greys. Now, some people have said maybe the Greys themselves aren't aliens. They could be like biological robots, like drones. I mean, in my last but one book, Immortality of the Gods, I talk about the work of Nigel Kerner, who's written a couple of really good books on the Greys and abductions. And Nigel's conclusion is that that's exactly what the Greys are. They're like a biological robot, possibly constructed by real aliens who we haven't seen and never seen maybe. And he feels that because they're biological constructs, they don't have a soul and they're not immortal. You know, they don't have an immortal soul or any kind of soul. And he feels that the point of abductions is to try and understand the nature of the human soul and possibly even replicate it or extract it, and to give themselves souls so they will have some sort of immortal life like us. They realise they're in a time span or a time limit, which physically we are. But if you believe in the existence of a soul, then potentially we have immortality. And he believes the Greys don't have that, but they're obsessively sort of tinkering with us to try and give themselves souls. Which, again, I don't see how anybody, if that was true, again, I don't see how anybody in government could ever tell us that because of what the blowback would be.
But they've also, in most cases that I've heard of, people who have had these experiences with the Greys report that the Greys, there does seem to be a hierarchy, and there's the shorter Greys, which are really the robotic ones. There's taller Greys, which seem more in charge and intelligent, but in many, many cases, there is also one of the insectoid type beings, the mantis type beings, who seem to be the absolute ones in charge. So it's not like the Greys themselves are doing stuff on their own. There seems to be a hierarchy at work between a couple of different races. And, maybe you could also look at the Greys as being, people have reported this before, they almost seem like a hive mind at times. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, maybe they are being remotely controlled by a more central hive intelligence rather than having souls themselves. Well, it's an idea anyway.
No, I mean, I think all these sort of concepts are valid when we're sort of looking into this phenomenon. I just wish that the community as a whole would sort of address all these issues and not kind of hide them away. It's kind of like the whole, the image, the elephant in the room, that no one wants to talk about. It's sort of standing there glaring you in the eye, and people are ignoring it. And they're ignoring it because, I think for several reasons. One being people don't like belief systems to be disruptive. And other occasions, it comes down to the fact that the truth could be so shocking that they can't deal with it and prefer not to deal with it. And then, of course, you've got the angle that, that some researchers have where they've kind of created a niche for themselves in this field or that field, and they don't want their views to change because they take the view that, well, if I change my opinion, what effect is that going to have on my previous books? But I've never really understood that approach, because if we find more information as we go along, well, so what if it changes your views on a book that you wrote 20 years ago? It's like if you're a 10-year-old kid and then when you reach 30, you don't watch the same TV programs as you did when you were 10. You don't do the same things because when you're 30, you're not 10, and vice versa. So I've never really understood why it's wrong or perceived as, not the right thing to do to change your views. So I think that has a lot to do with it as well, that somebody becomes, they're the cattle mutilation researcher who thinks they're done for ABC reasons. Somebody else is the person who thinks abductions are being done by time travelers or whatever. And they stick rigidly to their guns when in reality that we shouldn't be doing that. We should be looking at everything with an open mind. And if our views change after 10 years, well, so what? It just means we're furthering our knowledge.
I think a lot of that also has to do with, there, especially in the last 100 years, science and religion have split into different dogmas and ideologies to the point where each one doesn't really want to have much to do or acknowledge much with the other, especially on the scientific community. They don't want to acknowledge the spiritual side of things, or that if humanity have a soul, because then they'd have to be stuck trying to think about religion in certain ways and spirituality, and I think that just scares the crap out of them. And it's because they can't measure it, and this is the same thing with the nuts and bolts crowd, because if they can't measure it in a controlled environment and study it, then, then it doesn't really exist, which that's the problem. I mean, we are in a stage where if we're dealing with this interdimensional type of spiritual forces and energies, we don't have the technology yet really to accurately measure that. It's like 100 years ago trying to measure, radiation. We didn't have that technology, but we do now. So in time, maybe we can get to it. But until we reach that time, they just don't want to acknowledge it because they can't quantifiably measure it.
No, you're right. And I think another reason as well is that a lot of scientists, are funded by reputable organizations with reputations, And I think, a perfect example of all this is John Mack, who was a Harvard professor. When he started to come out with his abduction research and then started writing books, you've got this Harvard professor talking about alien abductions and the human soul. There was such a backlash against him, by his peers, by people, at Harvard. And I think when you see one scientist who becomes on the end of this, this intense backlash, I think that sometimes has an effect on scientists who privately may actually be really interested in these subjects, but for fear of ruining their reputations or for fear of losing a grant from this university or that university, they prefer to stay quiet because it's too much hassle for them to get involved. Now, to me, that's sort of taken the cowardly approach. If you believe something, stand up and say it. Don't just hide and, out of fear of what your peers are going to say. So I think that comes down to a lot of it as well. It's just human nature. They want to get up further up the ladder, and talking about UFOs doesn't get them further up the ladder.
Nick, so what we ask most of our guests when they come on is, have you had any personal experiences yourself, paranormal related, whether they're cryptozoology, UFO, ghost related, kind of like personal experiences yourself?
I've had a few over the years. I tell you what I do get a lot of is synchronicities, and I never ignore synchronicities. And I often find that if I'm working on a particular subject, like a book, and sometimes it stalls, I often kind of like just mentally try and meditate and put the thought out there to get me more information. And some people may find it bizarre, but I find that sort of mentally concentrating deeply and kind of getting yourself into almost like an altered state, sometimes it's as if something listens and you get the weirdest synchronicities that actually help you in the long term to figure out where you're going with this story. And lo and behold, something opens up that's where it had stalled. It now, opens it up to you. And also I found synchronicities often sort of teach you something as well. So I never, ever ignore synchronicities. I've had a lot of those. And now in terms of sort of really kind of paranormal stuff, probably the biggest example I can think of is back in 2003 when the dog I had at the time, Charity, she was a Shar-Pei, one of the wrinkly dogs, and she died, unfortunately. She was 8 years old. She died of a condition that Shar-Peis often get, and it's because they're unfortunately sort of inbred so much, and it creates this condition called familial Shar-Pei syndrome. And in the immediate couple of days after she died, some really weird stuff happened, and this was when me and my ex-wife were living in a duplex down in South Texas, and it honestly wasn't, a case of just hoping she was still around. I mean, some really weird stuff happened, like, for example, the night of her death, there was like this, suddenly out of nowhere, like this overwhelming odor of wet dog. Anybody who's owned a dog will know what a wet dog smells like. And I mean, it was like you could cut through it like a knife, and it just appeared from nowhere. And also, the sort of tapping of her claw nails on the tiles in the corridor between the bedrooms. And the weirdest, well, one of the weirdest things was that when we left, because we were moving to another apartment, I said, I'll just go and check every room. We haven't forgotten anything. And I went into the back bedroom, and I sort of jumped up and quickly ran my hand across the top shelf as I jumped up, because it was like about 8 feet high, and something flew off the shelf. It was just something small and black, and what it actually was, it was a strip of photographic negatives. One of the pictures, which had a picture of Charity on, and the fact that I'd said to Dana, my ex, that I'll make sure we haven't forgotten anything. It was almost like a symbolic thing that we hadn't forgotten the dog, and we were taking her with us. You see what I mean? And then after that, it was gone. It was like as if a light had been turned out over the click of the fingers. And although I haven't done much research into ghosts and things like that, I have spoken to a lot of people who've said something very similar, where as if when a relative or a friend dies, they seem to hover around for like a week or a few days or whatever, and then they're gone. And that was the case with Charity. So, I think for me that was a real event, and I honestly to this day believe some essence of her was hovering around for a few days and then winked out and went wherever we all go, whatever that might be.
Nick, do you think that belief actually kind of designates reality to people? So it's interesting you're saying the more you kind of like research into things and synchronicity pops up, it's like the universe saying either yes it exists or take a look over here. Do you think kind of like the reverse is true? Somebody with a skeptical outlook who doesn't believe are almost creating that for themselves as their reality?
Well, I do think there's something to that. I mean, John Keel made sort of a classic example of this, which was paraphrased in the Mothman Prophecy movie based on Keel's work. And he said, when you notice these things, they notice that you notice them. In other words, you go looking for this stuff. It's sort of like a radar goes off with them, and they sort of then look at you. So I do think if you put the thought out, it can have an effect on you, and maybe it can even have an effect on reality. I mean, for example, one of the things that interests me a lot, and what I've researched a lot, is the issue of what are known as tulpas, or thought forms. The idea that the human mind can sort of create realities. If you focus in your mind on a particular thing, like, say, for example, like a ghostly black dog with fiery red eyes, and you focus on it for days, weeks, and again you get yourself into like an altered state of mind, then suddenly 2 weeks after that your next door neighbour goes outside to put the car away, and he sees this sort of spectral black dog with fiery red eyes walking down the street, and he tells you about it, and you realise that what you've done is created what in Buddhist terms is known as a tulpa, like a thought form. In other words, the human mind can turn something into reality, which is actually created by the mind. It's not like a physical entity, but it can have like a semi-quasi form of existence based upon the belief that it exists. And the stronger the belief, the longer its, quote, life exists for. And as belief in these phenomena fade away, the phenomena fade away. Maybe that's why, 2,000 years ago, people saw endless numbers of demons or had encounters with them. 500 years ago, it was goblins and fairies. Then it was in the 50s, it was the long-haired space brothers. Today, it's the greys. It's like these phenomena are constantly changing based upon reality and belief systems that we have in place.
Nick? It's all right now. I forgot what I was going to say.
Tulpas, dear.
We've worked on many tulpa cases, me and Mark, over the years. And I forgot. And also, of course, Demon's Dwell. There's a tulpa in Demon's Dwell, isn't there, Mark?
Well, we did a case in Wales a couple of years ago that through a lot of research, we realized that it was the homeowner who was creating. She had some abilities, and her fears, she was able to create manifestations out of her fears, and she was creating tulpas, And it would always be, she was so afraid of the paranormal. She went to a psychic who said, oh yes, there were witches, a coven in your basement. Suddenly she started seeing an old hag witch on the stairs. And not only was she seeing it, other people were seeing it. Her mind was creating it. That was one of the more fascinating cases we ever worked with. Of course, she totally didn't want to hear that and kicked us off the case because it didn't fall in with her belief system. But that's exactly what was going on.
But the strange thing was she didn't even have a basement.
No, she didn't. Yeah, she just listened to what the psychic said. And what you were saying, Nick, about, over the centuries, there's another perfect modern day example, Slender Man. Slender Man, which was a fictional creation, and now it's starting to take on a life of its own based on all the stories.
Well, I've sort of talked about this as well in relation to the Men in Black, because in some respects, the Men in Black look not unlike the Slender Man, or vice versa. The Men in Black mystery is a lot older. But, the Slender Man is this sort of creepy, pale-faced thing, wears a black suit and a white shirt and black tie in many of the imagery of him, which is just like the Men in Black. Now, the Men in Black mystery kind of kicked off, although there have been some early ones, admittedly, but certainly from the late 40s, early 50s is when it kicked off. And this image of sort of the Trilby fedora hat wearing man in black with a black suit and tie and pale skin and stern face, it sort of straddled the realms of like the paranormal, but also the fear that people have of, government authority figures. And I think there's a good chance that a lot of Men in Black stories, because it's become so ingrained in popular culture, that the Men in Black have sort of strode out of people's nightmares into the real world, where they are now sort of temporarily living entities, living in some form at least. Maybe it's a temporary form. Maybe they don't even know what they really are themselves, which might explain some of the stranger Men in Black cases where they seem to it's almost as if they're just relating the same old statements, the same threat over and over again. It's like a computer program or, something on a loop, just playing over and over, like some old video loop or whatever. And, I think that could explain a lot of these cases, why the Men in Black are here one minute and gone the next minute, because they really are. And it's all dependent on the witness seeing them and believing in them and then strengthening them, right, basically. And I think that probably is what's also happened with the Slender Man. It's gone from being an internet meme, so to speak, and it's strode out into the real world with some sort of independence existence, even if it doesn't really know itself what it is.
Yeah, Nick, now that we're talking about the Men in Black, can we get onto your book, The Women in Black?
Yeah.
But is there any difference between the Women in Black and the Men in Black besides their gender?
Well, actually, there's not. I mean, the Women in Black phenomenon is sort of far less well known than the Men in Black. But
it's the first time I've heard it. First time I've heard it. Is it recent then? Is it recent?
Well, no, they're not all recent cases, but certainly some of them have been, withheld by the witnesses until they felt comfortable about speaking, which sometimes was sort of decades later. But the only reason I was able to write the book was because, I guess like anybody who writes a book on a particular subject, people read it and people who've had their own experiences contact you. So having done 3 books on the Men in Black over the years, I get a lot of feedback and people who contact me, whether it's, through email or Facebook or whatever. And, they'll say, I read the book and wanted to share my experience. Now, for every sort of handful of Men in Black reports I'd get, perhaps 1 out of every 10 or 20 or whatever, it would be a woman rather than a man. And so, in other words, had the people not approached me with their stories, I wouldn't have been able to write the book, because even I was only aware of 3 or 4 Women in Black cases. But over the last sort of 10 years, I sort of put together enough material, because a lot of it came through slowly, it didn't all come through at once, obviously. But over sort of 10 years, I finally had enough to write a full-length book on the Women in Black. And they're just like the Men in Black. They wear black outfits, usually like a black business suit kind of thing. Their skin is extremely pale, almost like a sheet of paper. They look kind of anemic and anorexic, and they often wear these large wraparound sunglasses and what are clearly long black wigs, and nearly always the wigs are cut in like a, somebody who has bangs. So in other words, the hair comes right down to the eyebrows, hangs down and kind of folds in around their cheeks. So you really cannot make out much of the faces. And that's like with the men in black who wear the old hats and again wraparound sunglasses. And the women in black typically turn up again in relation to not just UFO encounters, but people who've had Bigfoot and strange creature encounters. I've got quite a few cases of people who've been visited by the women in black and some with the men in black, when after they've been dabbling with Ouija boards, as if they'd sort of opened a door and these women in black and men in black came through. Now, in those cases, although a lot of the reports are of women in black knocking on the front door late at night like the men in black, with the Ouija boards, it's always been different in the sense that the women in black turn up in people's bedrooms late at night. It's, the person's awake or semi-awake, not able to move properly, like a classic sleep paralysis. Yeah. And the woman in black is looming over them, in the bed. And they're unable to move or cry out until, they finally break the spell, so to speak. So pretty much everything about them, is very different. Excuse me, it's the same as the men in black. The only difference is being, like you said, the gender, really. And the fact that they're less well known. And I think one of the reasons they're less well known is that a lot of people just haven't been looking into this or haven't made the connection. I mean, one of the chapters I have in the book is on a phenomenon that you may know of or remember because it went back a couple of decades, was the so-called phantom social workers who would turn up on people's doorsteps and claim that, there'd been abuse to the baby or the child in the house and, they demand to come in and even threaten to take the baby or the children away. Now, in many of these cases, the women were dressed in black and looked pale and sickly and ill. That's the only way you can describe them. And, when the parents got, they were concerned immediately, but when they asked to see the ID, more often than not, these women would quickly leave and drive off or be driven away in black cars. So the phantom social workers, or bogus social workers, as they were also known, were very much like the other women in black stories and the men in black. They turn up out of nowhere, make these threats, look strange, wear wigs. I've actually got a story from 2014, excuse me, where there was one of these bogus social worker stories as late as that. Most of them were late 80s, early 90s, but they still go on to this day. And people who have no knowledge of, the men in black and the women in black describe them as, they kind of look like a cross between a vampire and The Walking Dead. They actually don't look alive in some cases. Is the only way you can sort of describe.
What I can't get from it, is what is their aim? Okay, in the film Men in Black, right? They come there, they zap you, you forget everything. Okay, with these people, they're trying to take the babies sometimes. What is their actual aim? What's it all about? Well, and other people, people remember seeing them. It's not as if they forget or they've been zapped or anything. The whole reason of the
story is because they haven't forgot. But one of the things I found, which I think is kind of really interesting, is that many of the people who've been threatened and frightened by the men in black and the women in black, everything from UFO witnesses to people in Bigfoot, Ouija boards, and even the bogus social workers, because people obviously get terrified, that their children can be taken away. Yeah. The one element that's present in all of these cases is that the witnesses are placed in a state of terror. Now, one of the theories that's been put forward is that the men in black and the women in black could be sort of paranormal, almost like vampires that don't live on blood, but
energy and emotions.
The sameness of energy. Now, what better way to thrive on human energy than to create extreme states of stress and fear? And with all these sort of adrenaline and negative energies running around your body, they then essentially feed on the fear. So in other words, the threat is actually not a real threat. The whole point of the threat is to create fear and then the fear is what they feed on. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples, or one example, I should say, of a phenomenon that's been reported many times with both the men in black, the women in black, and that is that when they've been in the home of a person and, you know, they've delivered this threat, the witnesses often report suddenly starting to feel weak and sort of out of breath, and they've got no energy, like as if they're going to pass out or faint. One witness said it was like a diabetic crashing, you know, somebody's got diabetes and they've missed breakfast, missed lunch, and then sort of 8 o'clock at night, you know, it's like danger zone, and they've got to eat, and they've got to eat anything right now, you know. That's how they felt, that they felt like their energy, their life force was being drained of them, or drained from them, I should say. And they felt that's why they were feeling weak and clammy and shaky, because they were literally being sort of fed on. So that, you know, that might be sort of an approach to take. You know, it's not so much the event that's important, or the interrogation. The whole point could be to create massive states of terror, and that's what they bleed drive in.
You know, that kind of reminds me of, you know, in some negative haunting cases or demonic cases where these things are like that. They're kind of a parasite that focuses on negative energy. You know, maybe these men in black, or maybe they're what they are is more of opportunistic entities that they see an opportunity to come in. Somebody saw something. Hey, now let's go in and scare the living crap out of them, and we can have dinner. And it's really, in a way, it's really unrelated to the actual UFO phenomenon.
Well, one thing we do know is they've got very sensitive eyes on Felicity.
Well, one of the things I think that's important, you know, with all these stories of, you know, the men in black and the women in black, is the idea that that's not their sort of natural form, that they take on that form. And, you know, that may explain why, you know, you have, like the cases you've investigated, parallels with sort of demonic activity. And, I mean, you get this in demonic activity as well, where people have been around the men in black and the women in black, as I mentioned towards the beginning of the show. People often feel, not just feel ill, like I mentioned about like crashing like a diabetic, but also they often go down with quite serious illnesses and diseases. I've got a couple of cases like that in the Women in Black book, where people were in close proximity to particularly the women in black, and within days they'd gone down with something, you know, almost unheard of, you know, a condition that was for a while quite serious. And Albert Bender, the guy who began the whole MIB mystery in the early 50s, he walked away from ufology not just for his own sanity, but the fact that in days of having these experiences, he went down with all sorts of weird conditions in relation, like pummeling migraines, which he'd never got before, stomach issues, inflammatory conditions, all sorts of weird stuff. And he felt that it was the presence of the MIB that had done this, and eventually he walked away from ufology completely because he felt that was the only way to kind of break the connection. You know, when he broke it, they had nothing, no foothold with him, you know, and then he lived a normal life after that. But you know, and I think also, I think it's quite telling that Albert Bender was someone who had kind of like a weak character. He had a lot of low self-esteem, you know, quite unsure of himself, and I think for people of that kind of character, sometimes they gravitate to stuff that's going to elevate them to an exciting level, and sometimes that revolves around the paranormal, but they don't realize that if they're of that sort of weak character, they're the perfect person for some of these supernatural entities to get their claws into, because they're so easily manipulated and controlled.
Now, the one question I really want to know about the women in black are they hot?
Sometimes they are. I actually pointed out that somebody said to me, "Why did you write the book?" And I said, "Well, I said truthfully, partly truthfully, but a lot of my old girlfriends were actually goths, and which is true, they were. but that actually didn't have any bearing on why I wrote the book. But sometimes they are described as being sort of really pot-looking. Now, on other occasions, like the men in black, they kind of look like they're really ill, like somebody who's dropped, you know, sort of 30 pounds in weight in a week. You know, they kind of have that sort of sunken, unhealthy look to them. And there doesn't really seem to be any middle ground between the two. It's either they look sort of perfect, you know, like a model, or they look like, you know, like I said, the Walking Dead wearing good clothes.
Maybe it's because, maybe, Nick, it's whether they've fed or not, you know?
Well, that could be something to do with it, you know. I mean, like with us, you know, nothing lives without some sort of sustenance, you know, whether it's an ant or a human. We've all got to have something, you know.
It's a pity these people that have seen them don't notice that they're gaunt looking when they walk in, but really, really, you know, puffed out and looking normal when they walk out of the house. That answer the question.
It's actually kind of simple, but, you know, I do think there's something to that. But I'll tell you one thing that is interesting when you bring up this issue of the witnesses not noticing things like this. Yeah. Most people, you know, if you got a knock on the door at, say, 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and you look through the spy hole, and there's sort of three creepy characters, whether men or women or a combination of the two, in black outfits, and they look skinny and gaunt, you probably wouldn't let them in. No. But people do let them in. And, you know, people say with hindsight, well, I wouldn't let them in, but they do. And it's almost as if their mind has been controlled or zapped to the point where they are in an altered state, almost like when somebody goes under anaesthesia and they come out and they talk stupid for like 10 minutes till the anaesthetic wears off. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like that, as if the person has been placed into this state where they let the men in black in, let the women in black in, and they just sit there while the person's threatening, or the MIB is threatening them. You know, they don't do anything like phone the police or say get out the house. They just sit there in a kind of a daze while these people are terrorising them, really. And then when they get up and leave, it takes sort of 5 minutes often for the person to come out of this mind-altered state. Yeah. And then, of course, by then, the men in black and the women in black are long gone. So, again, you know, that might have something to do with, you know, when you said, why don't people realise this or notice that? It's because in most of these encounters, the person is in some kind of weird altered state, even if it's only a slight altered state. But on top of that, you also have situations where the men in black and the women in black never, ever sort of kick the door down to get in. They always ask to be invited in, or they force or mind control the person to say, would you like to come in? Which kind of ties in with the old parallels of vampire mythology, where the vampire can only enter your home when it's invited in, for the first time at least. And so, you know, you even have those vampire parallels where the men in black don't say, can I come in? They find a way for the homeowner to invite them in or to let them in.
Nick, has there been any reports at all of positive men in black? Because we always hear the negative side. Has there been anything positive, or for that matter, men or women in white? I don't know if there's an opposite version of them.
Well, the only ones I can think of, and interestingly enough, they're all in relation to car accidents. I know 3 cases involving car accidents. None of them were particularly serious, and one of them, actually, the accident never happened. But what it was that I've got 3 cases on record, 2 from the 70s and 1 from the 80s, where people were driving down the road and saw this man in black, like a classic man in black, pale, the hat, the whole thing, waving them down. And they slowed down. And in 2 cases, it was clear that, you know, had they not slowed down, they would have been involved in a major head-on accident with cars that were coming the other way. And in another one, it wasn't an accident as such, but it was a man in black who turned up when a woman had stopped her car because there was a car in the middle of the road. And as she got out, she thought she was going to help somebody. The 2 guys jumped out and tried to mug her. And this old-style black car turned up, and somebody got out, this guy in a black suit, and basically just looked at these 2 guys, and they jumped back in the car and left. Now, I have sort of no real way to explain cases like that, because not only are they the only 3 cases I've got that are positive in relation to your question, but also all 3 were revolved around car accidents or car incidents, which, you know, is kind of odd, even I have to admit that.
You just mentioned about how the Men in Black, and there seem to be a lot of parallels with vampire lore in terms of how they try to get people to invite them in. And I couldn't help but notice the parallel between the black-eyed kid phenomenon. Seems to be the exact same MO, where they come up with a lame story and trying to get the person to invite them inside, whether to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, use the telephone. It's the same type of phenomenon. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think, like the Slender Man phenomenon, although the black-eyed children didn't start off as an internet meme, it was certainly on the internet where they first got exposure. Now, I think what we're seeing is either something like a Tulpa thought form type thing that's sort of running wildly out of control in the form of black-eyed children, or it's some sort of phenomenon that feeds on us. Now, there are a lot of parallels between the Men in Black, the Women in Black, and the black-eyed kids. For example, all three of them have this sort of really pale skin. And it's very often not just pale, but it's like ultra smooth. Now, if you're dealing with like an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, their skin is going to be smooth. But the people have described the skin as almost looking like too smooth. And even for the adults, it's like as if they'd overdone it with a Botox or something, where they look sort of plastic and, like skin like a mannequin in a shop, that kind of thing. And so you have those parallels. They often wear black hoodies, and of course a hoodie has a hat. Now, it is a hat, part of it. And so you have the Men in Black who wear the old-style fedoras, trilby hats. You have the Women in Black who wear the long black wigs. And then you have the black-eyed children who have these hoodies pulled down so you're not able to see the face properly. So there's also like a hat component to all three as well, or headgear, so to speak. And the most important thing, they try and find a way to be invited into the home. Like, can we use the phone? We're lost. We need to phone our parents, or can you spare some food? We're homeless, that kind of thing. So there are parallels there. The one big difference is a lot of people assume that in the black-eyed children cases that there's very often a UFO component, but for the most part, in nearly all cases, there's no UFO link at all. They just randomly turn up and try and get into the house. It's not like the witness to the black-eyed children saw a UFO the week before. That rarely ever happens in these cases. So that is one of the big differences. Now, of course, the major difference is the eyes as well. The black-eyed children are called black-eyed children because their eyes are completely black, solid. With the Men in Black, not so much the Women in Black, with the Men in Black, their eyes are often bulging and almost sort of bulging out of their faces, very big and starey. But they look normal in terms of, the white of the eye and the central colour of their eye, whether blue, green, brown, or whatever. So there are differences, but there's no doubt in my mind that there's a connection. And I think a lot of these different things are all interconnected, like the Men in Black, Women in Black, black-eyed children, the Slender Man, the Shadow People, the Hat Man, the Grinning Man. I think they're all parts of one phenomenon that kind of subtly, and in some cases not quite so subtly, appears and manifests in broadly similar ways, whether a male, a female, a child, but they're all somehow part of the same thing, I think.
It makes me wonder if this phenomenon is not just a recent phenomenon starting in the 40s, what if it is actually a lot older, and with that, that could be the basis for a lot of the things that we hear about vampires, pale skin, they look dead, they have to be invited in. So maybe there's something there. Irene, you had a question.
Sorry, I was muted. Nick, like Mark says, they have to be invited in. Has there ever been any cases where people have actually seen these and been strong enough to had enough willpower to not have them come into the house, to turn around and say, no, clear off?
Well, there are a few, and when that actually happens, it's almost as if the mind control hasn't worked, and so the person's still in a normal state. Now, in the few cases where that's happened, the weird thing is, it's almost as if it like throws a glitch in the works. What happens is that they act in like a confused state, as if they don't know what to do. In other words, it's like they're part of a program that, you know, does this and does that, and the glitch, if you like, affects whatever it is that they consider to be their normal track, and they don't know what to do. You know, they don't know how to respond properly, and very often they just leave. They just make their excuses and leave. And it's almost like you have somehow, you know, it's as if they're almost like a parrot fashion. They come in and they have their, you know, their statement they make or whatever. And obviously everyone is a little bit different to the other, but it's basically the same theme. You won't talk about what you saw or else. But when you stand up to them, they just don't know what to do. It's not like
interestingly, Nick,
slam you against the wall and say you will listen. No, it's the exact opposite to what you would imagine. They just, I won't say they freak out, that's too strong a term, but they get massively confused and just leave.
So
Interestingly,
it's like you've messed. Sorry, Andy. It's like you've messed with their wiring then.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. Yeah.
I was just going to say that the reports of the Greys and people dealing with the Greys, exactly the same thing. That if you don't kind of like follow what they say, or you kind of like ask them a question, the ones that are more robot-like, they can't compute. And there was somebody that said actually that if you want to get rid of the abductions, or you're in an abduction and you want to get rid of the Greys, think happy thoughts, because they only perceive kind of like scare people, abduct people, bring people away. If you're happy and you send them happy thoughts, it scrambles their circuits and they can't cope with it.
Yeah, and I think you can find that in a lot of, you know, paranormal experiences. And I think that's why that, you know, you can find people who have different belief systems and would call upon their, you know, their respective God, so to speak, and it actually ends the encounter. You know, it banishes the phenomenon. Now, I think that's not so much because, you know, they're calling on this or this God or that God or this deity or whatever. I think it's more likely to be the case that the strength of the emotion of the person calling on their own personal God or whatever, it's the strength of the emotion of the person that basically ensures that the Greys or the MIB or whoever leave. You know, you're in such a state of high emotion, you're actually able to get rid of it. But so I think it's the calling up of the God, if you like, that works. You know, and that's why it may work for one person who believes in Christianity, and, you know, for somebody else has another religion, it still works for them. You know what I mean? Because it's the nature of the person's action, the emotion-filled barrier it puts up or call for help that is so strong that you know, it has a major effect on the ability of these things to affect us.
Well, in a lot of the UFO cases or alien abduction cases, people experience missing time. So, but has anybody, or have you heard of any reports of anybody experiencing a gap in time before, after, during dealing with these men and women in black?
Not so much missing time, but there are a few cases where the witnesses said that when they were being interrogated, it was like time kind of went slowly. In other words, there wasn't like a period that they couldn't remember, you know, that for 3 hours are missing and they just couldn't remember what happened in those 3 hours. It wasn't like that, but it was more as if they were in an altered state, and time didn't seem normal somehow. You know, it was as if the normality of our world was gone. You know, and interesting enough, that kind of ties in. You know, you find these old sort of folkloric stories from England, Scotland and Wales, Ireland from centuries ago, where people would sort of mingle with the so-called little people, you know, pixies, goblins, and they would be taken to the fairy kingdom, and, you know, time would stand still, or the fairies would never age, and, you know, people would come back from the fairy kingdom to find a week had gone by, but they hadn't forgotten anything when they were there. It was just time seemed to move at a different rate. Now, I wouldn't want people to think I believe in like sort of little flitting fairies, you know, with wings flying around the Christmas tree, because that's actually not what fairies and goblins were like. back then. If you read the original stories, they're quite sinister little dwarfish things that are very often lived underground. They would steal babies, and sometimes they could be friendly, sometimes not so friendly, sometimes dangerous. And I think all these phenomena have sort of, over the centuries, have interacted with us in different ways, but they all have these same traits and similarities to such an extent that, I think it is like a manifestation of one thing, but in different ways, over the years.
We can blame Walt Disney for that. for changing the really scary stuff into like little fairies walking around.
It was the Victorian times, wasn't it?
Yeah, Victorian.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I think it started almost with the Coddington fairies, and moving on from there. But Nick, you just brought up an interesting point, and one of the things that I know Irene and I have been looking into, and part of our own ongoing research into different phenomenon, is this idea that a lot of the old Celtic fairy lore, even other countries like Iceland and the elves and Native Americans with some of the little people, like the Cherokee little people, there might be a relation to all of that in terms of this other types of phenomena that we're experiencing with men in black, black-eyed kids. I mean, there is reports or our theories that sometimes these things can change shape. Can shapeshift to a certain extent in order to do whatever it is that they want to do. And maybe there's more, these different types of phenomena are more related than most people realize.
Yeah, and I mean, you can find cultures of shapeshifters, all across the planet. It's not like some people think, just werewolves, people sprouting hair and fangs at a full moon. That's sort of that's one sort of imagery, but within many cultures, fairies supposedly could shapeshift, goblins could. Also, as you mentioned with some of the Native American stories, even what we perceive as regular animals, like for example in Native American lore, the coyote, was like a trickster and a shapeshifter. You can even make an argument about Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where, this eerie-looking, red-eyed creature was seen in the 60s. Now, some people swore they saw what looked like a humanoid form with large bat-like wings. Other people described it as like a giant bird. Other people as like a giant bat of some sort. But some, as I said, it was like a definitive humanoid form. Now, that being the case, I don't believe they were all mistaken in what they saw, but some of them were clear in what they saw was not humanoid, was more sort of bird or moth-like. So that suggests, maybe the Mothman was some sort of shape-shifting thing. And there are a few other cases I've got on file where alien entities or assumed alien entities change into like balls of light, small balls of light, and or the balls of light turn into humanoid-looking aliens. So, I think either there's some sort of literal shape-shifting, or it's the perception of the witness that changes because the phenomenon is perhaps able to project in the mind that you'll see me like this or you'll see me like that. So whether or not it's actual shape-shifting on the part of the entity or whether it affects our minds so we see it different, I think it could be one of the two, or maybe a bit of both, really.
Well, you mentioned the Mothman, and I know that it's known by Mothman in America, but I believe it's in the UK. There have been reports of an Owlman sighting, which almost sounds very similar. And also getting back with the whole idea of thought forms and tulpas, or even if these things can kind of read our minds and shapeshift, I mean, what is the difference, would you say, between the old world lore of werewolves and now we have the modern sightings in America of Dogman?
Well, I mean, I've investigated a lot of Dogman cases over the years here in the US, and there's no doubt that, that there's an obvious connection or similarity with so-called werewolf reports of the past. But what's interesting is that I've actually only got, I think, 2 cases out of dozens, and Linda Godfrey, who's written extensively on this phenomenon as well. Linda's only got barely a handful too, where people describe seeing somebody shapeshift into one of these creatures. You know, you'd imagine if we're talking about standard werewolf lore, there'll be far more reports, but for the most part, the dogmen are only ever seen in the form of the dogman, you know, which is like this large wolf-like animal that has the ability to stand on 2 legs and 4 legs. You know, obviously, you know, that sometimes these wolves are described as being much bigger than a regular wolf when they're walking normally. But of course, if they stand up on their hind legs, then you're obviously going to get, inevitably, you're going to get the werewolf parallels. But what you don't get in most of these US reports, in fact, nearly all of them, is any sort of angle of shape-shifting. So I find that kind of interesting. And, you know, they also turn up, though, in relation to sightings of UFOs and strange lights, or they're seen around the same sort of locations time and time again, like bridges or cemeteries, graveyards, crossroads. You know, again, they're clearly, there's a paranormal aspect to it, but there may well be, you know, like a physical part to it as well. So I think they're connected with the traditional legends of werewolves, and I think it probably is the same phenomenon. But you know, there are aspects to it as well that seem to have changed over the centuries as well.
Nick, have you come across anything recently that you've never heard of, like completely surprised you, kind of like either a new kind of urban myth or a new kind of like cryptozoological type animal that no one's ever heard of, and you're scratching your head and thinking, what on earth is this?
I'm not really sure of that, to be honest.
Nick, if you hear about Hedgehog Man, that's one I put down. Don't worry about it.
I guess I really haven't, nothing kind of springs to mind, but in saying that, one of the things that does interest me, what I do get now and again, are reports from people who claim to have seen sort of beings that, you know, like subterranean beings, that, you know, allegedly live deep under the ground. You know, you can find stories of those throughout entire history and culture, you know, of sort of subterranean races, things like that. And not often, but I do get, I would say 3 or 4 times a year, stories, really detailed stories from people who've seen, you know, what you could only describe as something humanoid, very often smaller, but claims to live underground. You know, people say they know where these things live, and those are kind of intriguing, but also bizarre. The idea that, you know, there could be entire underground cultures hidden from us, you know, living below the surface of the planet. I've never personally investigated any of these cases as such, because they've always been sort of, you know, on the other side of the country or wherever, or the world. But there's no doubt that, again, you can find throughout culture, you know, around the world, stories of, you know, entities living underground and occasionally surfacing and interacting with us. So it's nothing new, but for me it is something that, you know, is still very bizarre because of the nature of it, and also because I only get, you know, very few of these stories.
And presumably, if something new did come along, I mean, for instance, the Slender Man is a fairly new phenomena. You'd probably want to cross-correlate at least maybe 3 different separate stories, perhaps, or something of that nature.
Yeah, and I think it's one of these things, you know, when you only get a few stories of one phenomenon, sometimes it is really difficult to know what to do with these reports, because you do need sort of similar cases to compare them to, you know. And if you don't have that, you're kind of like, well, what do we do with this other than just file it away? I mean, some stories I've got, they're not completely cryptozoological, but in a way they are. I've got a lot of reports of giant frogs. Now, by giant frogs, I mean like the size of like an Alsatian dog or something like that, you know, which should not be swimming around. Now, if they are, they're probably some sort of genetic mutation or something along that, along those lines. But again, I mean, I've got like a handful of those. It's like, well, what can we do with cases like that? Somebody says they've seen a gigantic frog, you know. They're interesting stories, but with such a lack of material, it's hard to know, you know, where to go with them.
Well, you mentioned the underground beings, and there's a lot of stories about aliens having bases underground, or even the old, the Celtic lore, the fairies underground, elves underground. Lately, in modern times, there's a couple of recent examples of something underground, obviously. I don't know if you saw that video that went viral a couple months ago about that spelunker. He has a YouTube channel where he explores abandoned mines. And he's not a paranormal person, but he had an experience in this mine in California where he started hearing, and he recorded it, this heavy whispering, like three people having a conversation, and it really freaked him out. He had to get out of the mine. Barry Fitzgerald has been doing a lot of research on the Celtic fairy lore side in Ireland and the UK, and he's been doing some explorations underground in mines and caverns, and having some very strange experiences that, some people would say, oh, maybe somebody died in the mine, and I don't quite buy that. I'm even going to throw out here, I just did an investigation here in Colorado over a month ago. There's these caverns outside of Colorado Springs called Cave of the Winds, and we went way back into this section with, they have the Grand Gallery, and it's part of their lantern tour. There's no electricity back there. There's no written records of anybody dying back there ever. And yet we encountered a lot of intense activity from disembodied voices, a lot of EVP. We got light phenomenon in the cave where it's so far back in, there are no insects. And it was surprisingly active. And yet I really couldn't pin it to dealing with human spirits or ghosts. I just got the impression that we're dealing with something else that may live in these caverns or may be deep underground that we just don't fully understand yet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's impossible. I mean, a book was written on this a few years ago by Matt Tonis called The Crypto-Terrestrials, and it's only a small book because Matt died, unfortunately, before he had a chance to finish it all up. But the publisher went with what material was available. So it's a slim book, but it's a good one. And Mac, makes an interesting case about how and why we have all these legends and stories about, subterranean races and the little people coming to the surface. And you find these all around the world. And, he makes an interesting case for the idea that maybe we do share the planet with some sort of ancient species that rarely ever surfaces and which has been responsible for a lot of our cultural mythology about, magical creatures living underground.
Even so many other cultures, like in the Middle East, there's the jinn, which is now becoming very popular in Western culture. I don't buy, with all due respect to Rosemary Ellen Guiley, I don't buy a lot of that mythology that they try to project as being truth. I think there's just so much that we just don't know, but it's related to the types of creatures that have been experienced in many different cultures around the world. It's definitely something to look into, I think. Another one that you mentioned earlier was the balls of light. And I'm becoming more and more intrigued with these balls of light because people have been experiencing those in all different types of situations, not just with UFOs, but in paranormal situations. They've been filmed. I know in the Hayu-Baciu forest in Romania, a couple of different television shows went there and filmed. They caught the balls of lights out moving in the woods. And I even have a good friend of mine who is a traditional Bigfoot hunter out of Ohio, Tim Stover, who he called me up one night totally freaking out because he's not into the paranormal. He believes Bigfoot is a undiscovered hominid. But yet he called me up because he was in the middle of the woods and this ball of light came out of the middle of the woods, floated right up to his face and hovered there for a few seconds. And it only disappeared when he reached for his camera. Then it winked out. A few days later, he actually caught one on video floating behind him, and it was weaving in and out of the trees. So it was obviously not a car light or reflection in the distance. And Irene, I believe you said you've seen some balls of light in the past too, didn't you?
Yeah, when I was a little girl in my bedroom. And I was trying to do my homework. And I'd been doing my homework, and I got into bed and turned off the light, and these balls of light were just dancing around the room.
What colour were they?
Three of them. Very, very bright white light.
Why? Did they seem like they were intelligent, like they knew you were there? And
Yeah, because they used they came a couple of times. I think I must have been about 8, 9 years old. They came a couple of times, and one time they came very close to the side of the bed, and I put my hand out, and it was just as I just felt an energy go through my hand when this thing was hovering over the top of it. I didn't know it was an energy then. I didn't know what it was, but I just felt this sensation. But now I obviously know it was some sort of energy.
It makes me wonder that
it's in my book. I wrote about it in one of my books.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if this type of energy, and people have also seen these type of balls of energy in dealing with Bigfoot activity too. I mean, I'm even thinking maybe what Tim encountered in the woods might have been directly related to Bigfoot, because I do believe that there's a lot more of strange and paranormal activity surrounding it than it just being an undiscovered hominid. That's just my personal opinion. But they seem to happen in all sorts of different phenomenon. Do you think we're dealing with an energy form that can shapeshift and be involved in multiple types of phenomenon, or what's your thought on it?
Well, I mean, there could be, because I won't say that the evidence is there to support it, but there are a number of cases on record where people have talked about balls of light turning into other phenomena, or vice versa. I mean, a good example, there was an author in the 1950s named Orfeo Angelucci who wrote a number of books on his alien encounter experiences. Now, this is way before, the whole ball of light phenomenon was really part of ufology. But he talked about how when he would see these entities, when he was very often in like an altered state, they would appear first as like a ball of light anywhere the size of sort of like a soccer ball to like a beach ball. So they weren't little balls of light, but they were, sort of 2 to 3 feet across in terms of like the beach ball kind of thing. And he described how they would appear as this ball of light, and then they would transform into like a humanoid form and then speak to him. Now, there are other examples, again, throughout history where you can find this kind of thing going on, particularly with fairy stories and things like that, where, we're dealing with something very, very similar. For example, the sort of classic book on fairies written a little more than a century ago by W.Y. Evans Wentz, called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. And that one contains a number of stories of people who'd seen what were described as like fairy lights that would transform into something more human-looking. And I've got a number of reports similar to the ones you mentioned about Bigfoot being seen in conjunction with balls of light. I'll give you a good example. I live just outside Dallas, Texas, and about a 5-hour drive from me is a large area of forest land in Texas called the Big Thicket. Now, there's a road that runs through the Big Thicket. It's this massive area of forest land where there have been numerous Bigfoot-type sightings throughout the years. Now, what's interesting, there's a road that runs through the Big Thicket called Bragg Road, but locally it's known as Ghost Light Road because people see these strange balls of light flitting through the woods. And I actually saw one myself back in 2005 on one of the occasions I was there. And it wasn't particularly big, it was like a tennis ball, something like that, and it was in view for maybe 3 or 4 seconds and was gone. But what's interesting is, as I said, that area, Ghost Light Road, where there have been numerous balls of light reports, there have been a large number of Bigfoot-type encounters as well. So I think somewhere there is a connection between these Bigfoot entities and the ball of light phenomena. And I don't personally believe that Bigfoot is just a North American equivalent of like an African gorilla. It's not. I don't claim to know what it is, but it's far weirder than just a type of ape that science hasn't recognized yet. There's something more to it than that.
Well, there's also in North Carolina, in the Brown Mountains, known as the Brown Mountain Lights, where people routinely go out there and watch these lights come out of at dusk time and dance around and fly around.
Yeah, and you can find those everywhere. I mean, even like in Middle Ages Europe, the fairy lights. Fairies are often seen with these little sort of glowing balls of light around them. So again, we have these tie-ins, and I think, when we look at these kind of cases from all around the world and throughout history, you can see certain key issues that pop up time and again, like the altered state of mind, time distortion, balls of light, things changing from one form to another, and then the accelerated number of reports of certain things when they become part of our culture and belief system, like the Slender Man, like the Men in Black, the Black-Eyed Children. You can find those angles, even if they change over the centuries in their appearance and their names, you can find all those sort of key components in a lot of different paranormal phenomena.
We have about 15 minutes left here, and we want to shift gears a little bit. I mean, we had talked about Men in Black, ufology, and you've made many appearances on Ancient Aliens and discussing the idea of the ancient alien question, if mankind has been manipulated in the past. Now, one of your latest books is Immortality of the Gods, which talks about the alien connection to eternal life. Can you just give us a brief synopsis on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, the whole ancient astronaut angle is one that interests me, or parts of it do. Some of them have been done to death so many times that it's not worth really writing about them because, so many people have covered those areas. But so, I'm not someone who writes extensively on the subject, but I did do a trilogy of books on the subject for New Page Books, and the final one, Immortality of the Gods, came out just a couple of months ago. Before that, I did Bloodline of the Gods in 2015, and then Weapons of the Gods 2016, and this new one, The Immortality of the Gods, which looks at the sort of history and legend and mythology from the ancient past to the present day of sort of supernatural immortal beings. And so it covers things like, the stories of the Anunnaki and the biblical accounts of people like Methuselah living to almost 1,000 years. And then it goes through the Middle Ages with how the fairies supposedly, never aged in this magical kingdom they lived in. And then things like the Count of Saint Germain. And then it sort of brings things up to date with the whole issue of how science is now coming to trying to tackle the aging process and try and figure out how we might slow the aging process down, not just, by eating better, but literally slow the aging process. So, so that 85 or whatever isn't our top limit, in theory, we could perhaps push the barriers even further back, along further.
With the whole idea of immortality, part of the problem I see with people, I don't understand people who want to embrace immortality. I mean, I'm 53 and I get sick of life already. So I can imagine living about another 1,000 years going, oh my God, I got like 909 more years of this shit. So.
Well, I guess it depends on the nature of what immortality is. I mean, if, we live to be, say, 900, and for the last 800 of that, you live it as if you were 80 years old. That wouldn't be much fun. But if there was a way, to actually slow it to where, you could spend most of your life at 35 or something. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that we actually, although we're not able to, stop the aging process, there's no doubt about that right now, at least. But we understand why people do age. It actually revolves around something known as the Hayflick limit. And basically what it is, it defines how every human being, or every human cell, I should say, of every human being, only has the ability to divide and reproduce between 40 and 60 times. That's the limit. Now, when when that division process stops, the cells start to break down essentially, and we age and we deteriorate, but if we could find a way to ensure that those cells kept replicating, dividing, stayed healthy, then we could actually, in theory, find a way to slow the aging process. But the problem is we don't have the science or the technology to do that. It's kind of like if you send time travel to car back to the 1500s, the people there would probably understand what it was. It was meant to take people places, but with gasoline not having been invented, without petrol back then, you wouldn't be able to move it. So it's kind of like with us, we understand the theory of how immortality might be achievable, but the science doesn't exist to put it into place. That's the problem.
One idea that has struck me on this whole idea of immortality is the idea, and we're, again, it's something we're looking into into a lot of our modern research and a lot of different phenomena we're looking into, is I'm wondering if it's a misunderstood concept based on the fact that even now science is starting to prove that time is not linear. All time is actually happening at once. It's only our human perception. Our brains are only able to conceive of time in a linear fashion. We're born, we age, we die. And if we're dealing with beings, entities who are coming in from other dimensions, they may be coming in from realities where time doesn't matter. Even on a spiritual plane, when people talk about, dying and going on to heaven or whatever the spiritual plane is, time is not a concept anymore. But yet for us and humans, it's a very important concept. We're very much aware of our mortality, which makes me wonder if some of these other beings that people talk about that, live for thousands of years, it's more of a misunderstood way of looking at the fact that they were living in a timeless state.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting way to look at it, because you can find a lot of cases where time did seem to stand still, or these entities didn't age, excuse me, and specifically because they didn't live in what you would call sort of our reality. I mean, a classic example again is old stories of things like goblins and fairies and, the little people, so to speak. They lived in sort of like a strange world that was disconnected to us, but intimately also connected. But in that realm of existence, time, from our perspective, seemed to stand still. And I say when people would come back from these magical realms, years had gone by. But for the person in the other realm at that time, it wasn't like they were in suspended animation, didn't know what was going on. It was just that time traveled or moved at a different rate. And so if these people only came back every few years, but for the people in the little village in the north of England or whatever, 20 years might have gone by between each of the visits that person made back to the real world. So, they, in that sense, they might be perceived as being immortal because they've not changed where everybody else after 30 or 40 years has. So I think there is something to this idea that different realms of existence, time may actually act in a way very different to it does to us. Now, it's almost sort of impossible for us to try and imagine how that could be. How can a week or a day not be a week or a day? It's hard for us to get our heads around. But, maybe that's because we've only ever been exposed to this one timeline. Maybe that might explain some of these cases where it's almost like a glitch has occurred where, somebody suddenly finds themselves back in time, for a couple of minutes and reality returns, or, they see almost like an image of a piece of film footage, if there was such a thing, of something that happened 500 years ago, 600 years ago. It's as if you're getting a glimpse into another timeline that perhaps coexists with us now and again for whatever reason.
Nick, do you find that different continents and different countries have different legends. I mean, I know there's, you know, you've got the Sasquatch and you've got the abominable snowman. Yeah. Are there any crossovers? I mean, for instance, are there any kind of maybe Asian cryptozoological animals or creatures found in Europe, or any African ones in Australia, or are there any kind of crossovers at all with cultures?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you think of Bigfoot, I mean, everybody knows of the Bigfoot of North America, and you've got the Yeti, the abominable snowman in the Himalayas.
Yeah.
China has its own equivalent, which is known as the Yeren. And India has its own equivalent. Australia has the Yowie. If you go back sort of 1,000 years or so, and a bit later than that in England, you had reports of wild men, sort of hairy wild men, and many of those cases came from the east coast of England, around Suffolk and Norfolk and that kind of area. But they were described, as sort of more of a humanoid, but covered in hair, and very often sort of having this large club in their hands. So we have a lot of reports like that, and all cultures around the world pretty much have accounts of little people. You can go pretty much anywhere and there'll be, a legend of these magical little people that could perform all sorts of weird tasks and skills, etc. Now, Mothman in Point Pleasant, mentioned that earlier, and you brought up the Owlman, which is this, like a glowing-eyed humanoid winged figure that's been seen in the village of Mornan in Cornwall. Now, you have numerous other reports. There's a very little-known one, but you can find a few stories on the internet about it. In Houston, Texas, in the early 50s, one known as the Houston Batman, which was like a flying humanoid type creature. You can go back to, ancient mythology with things like the harpies. And again, you find flying humanoids throughout history and culture.
Very quickly, Nick, what do you make of the footage apparently taken in Mexico of what looks like flying humanoids on kind of weird rocket type, spaceship type things?
I mean, one or two are quite interesting, but some of them, to me, they kind of smack more of like balloons, I think, or, something along those lines. I'd be sort of more impressed if they moved. They seem, although they're moving through the sky, the figure itself remains static, which is always a little bit suspicious, I think. But there's no doubt there's a large quality and a body of reports of these things, which... But, just because a couple of photographs might be bogus or whatever, it doesn't mean the phenomenon's bogus. I think that's an important thing to remember.
Irene, do you have a question, last question for Nick as we're wrapping up here?
No, I've just been absolutely amazed at what he's just been saying.
Well, we have a couple of minutes left, so I have one last question here for you, Nick. When we were going back a couple minutes here on the immortality of the gods aspect, I've noticed in the UFO phenomenon, a lot of experiencers, and even Whitley Strieber had mentioned this when he dealt with the one main, like he felt it was a feminine type of tall gray, and he got the impression it was very, very old. Very old and spanning time. But there's also the aspects that people talk about, that the theories that these aliens are also time travelers and they can flip back and forth through time. Could that also be related to, this idea of immortality?
Well, it could be. I mean, if you're a time traveler and you come back to, say, 2017, and then you jump back home, and then you come back to say 2057, 40 years later. For you've aged like maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes. For the people there who might see you, remember you when they were 10 years old, now they're seeing you when they're 60 years old, and they see that you haven't aged. That might be perceived as immortality, but it's actually not. It's just that you're jumping through the timelines, and that makes it seem like that. Now, there are actually, some good studies have been done on the idea whether the UFO phenomenon could not be sort of aliens or interdimensional entities, but time travelers from the future, and that's one of the theories that's been put forward for the Men in Black, because they often ask people, it sounds strange, but they often ask people, what time is it? Or they'll say, tell us what time it is, which makes no sense when they're just supposedly there to interrogate you. But, people have suggested, well, what if they're actually asking what time is it? What time era is it? And, of course, another time factor is their clothing is always out of time. That they still wear the kind of clothes that guys wore back in the 50s, the fedora hats, skinny ties, suits. They kind of look like they came out like a 1950s gangster movie. It's still how they dress. So people have suggested, well, what about if in the future there's not much known or left from the 21st century, and all they've got is a few remnants, and that includes pictures of how the guys dressed in the 50s, so they try and blend in, not realising that they're actually not blending in, So,
yeah, they're coming from 10,000 years in the future, and they miss it by 60 years.
Exactly. So, it's one of these situations where, even if you know the story of the Thunderbird photograph, where people claim, numerous people, famous people in the field of 4T and research, claim to have seen, back in the late 50s or early 60s, a photograph of this large, huge, gigantic bird nailed to the doors of a barn, and people claim to have seen it in all different magazines, and now no one can find it. And one of the reasons that's been suspected or suggested is that perhaps in the future somebody's altered the timeline because they don't want us to know the truth of this strange creature, and by altering the past, the thing that people saw in this magazine or that magazine actually no longer exists in that magazine because the timeline was altered, but it didn't affect the memories of the people who saw it. So again, it's a controversial theory, but the idea, dozens of people claim to swear they saw this photograph. Now it can't be found anywhere, and it's like, well, maybe in some strange way it never did because the timeline has been deliberately manipulated.
Wow. Nick, you know what? We could keep going on this. We are having such a blast, but you know what? We are out of time. So before we go, I just want to mention to people, your last couple books that have come out, 365 Days of UFOs, A Year of Alien Encounters. We have Immortality of the Gods. We have Women in Black, The Creepy Companions of the Mysterious MIB. Where can people find your books, and how can they, what's your website address?
Okay. Well, people can get my books from Amazon online. If you're in the US, you can buy them off the shelves in Barnes & Noble. And in the UK, if they're not off the shelves, you can order them through your local bookstore. People can reach me at my blog, which is Nick Redfern, World of Whatever. And if you go to my blog, just type that in, World of Whatever, Nick Redfern, it'll take you right to the blog. And there's a contact section there which will take you to Facebook, and people can message me or contact me there as well.
Nick, thank you again for coming on. This has been a fantastic show. We've really enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Nick.
It's been really interesting.
All right, and thank you, everybody, for listening to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio. We'll catch us next week. You all have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.